was a little girl, I was a rock hound. I loved rocks. I collected them everywhere for their color, for their size, their shape, for their texture. I had a little cigar box full of rocks, and then it expanded to a shoebox. And I had a cigar box full of insects, too. I'm not going to talk about that today. One of my parents' friends had a rock tumbler, and one time he gave me a tiny little box with about, 10 or 12 polished stones in it. And it was the first time I'd seen anything like that, and I was so hooked. They were beautiful and smooth and cool. One of them looked like butterscotch. They were amazing. So hooked on rocks, and I still am. When we first moved back to Minnesota, we lived in Egan, and across the road was a great big cornfield and a farmhouse. And a few years after we moved in there, the construction crew came in and started digging the place up for a housing development. So I got my boys, who were quite little at the time, ready for an adventure, and we went over to this excavated area and found fossils. It was pretty fun. We loaded our wagon and our backpack and got a lot of fossils. And one day when I was digging to plant some shrubs or flowers in our yard there, I found a black rock that was really unusual. It was about the size of a deck of cards, but it had indentations where my fingers could go and kind of a point, and it just felt so good and right in my hand. And I just had a very wonderful experience with it. I thought I was connected to someone ancient who used this as a tool, maybe to skin a hide or something, and I just felt our oneness and the time fall away, and it was a beautiful thing to discover. We moved to Lakeville eventually, our family did, and I love to walk. I talk about that so often up here. The first couple of weeks that we lived in Lakeville, I took walks to find out about our new neighborhood. So I walked on railroad tracks and through the YMCA camp and around the lake and on the roads and on the trails. And those first couple of weeks, I found heart-shaped rocks everywhere I went. Almost every day I picked up a heart-shaped rock. And my son Nick kind of picked up the skill too. This is a photograph of one that he found one day. Looks beautiful on this photo, and actually the rock is teeny, teeny, tiny. Yeah. Where did I want to talk about next? Oh yeah, a few weeks ago, you maybe saw some of these slides up here before this service. My husband was just down in Red Rock Canyon for a week, and he and a few of his work buddies went climbing every day and had a great time. I stayed home. I don't do that. But he came home after a week and of this great adventure, and he did some work there too. But he unpacked and told me, "Barb, I brought something for you. I brought you a rock." Yeah, for a split second, I thought, a diamond? No.
That's a rock.
It was actually a tiny little round rock, and it was very sweet, and I meant to bring it today, but I didn't. It was just a cute little rock. So you're probably wondering, what in the world am I talking about so many rocks for? But we'll get there. Last Sunday, I talked about a book by Alan Cohen called Looking In for Number One. It was written about 12 or 14 years ago, I think. Alan is a workshop presenter and a life coach and something else, a writer, that's it. He's written so many books, and I like his writing. I really enjoy it because he's down to earth. He's got a great sense of humor, and he has this beautiful way of taking the everyday and making it sacred, which is a skill I like to have myself. So last week we talked about the importance of looking within. A lot of times we look outside ourselves for answers, for guidance. We look to special teachers or experts to get our answers, when really we have wisdom and divine light and intelligence within us, so we can look within for that. And we also heard that we can follow our own guru, right? Remember that? It's actually the way it's spelled gives us a clue. G-U-R-U. Thank you, Alan. So this morning I'm going to share a couple more stories from Alan Cohen and a parable from Jesus. And yes, there will be rocks involved. The first story from Alan's book is, he lives in Maui, Hawaii. What a wonderful place to live. But he travels the world giving workshops and taking groups to sacred places. And on one trip, he took a group of people to Egypt. And they were visiting some pyramid sites one day, and one woman found an amazing rock. It was a little round pink stone rock, and she was just blown away by it, you know. She wondered if it had been in some jewelry maybe, or if it had some healing properties to it, or just how ancient was this little stone. And I could relate, because when I found that black rock in my garden, boy, I was thinking all sorts of things like that too. So she was excited and wanted to know more, so she decided to find a private place where she could sit with this little rock, hold it in her hand, and meditate, hoping to get some clarity or information about it. And as she sat and meditated, it began to get a little soft in her hand. And she started to go, wow, remembering stories of alchemy, transformation, and she meditated a little longer, and it got softer. And finally she looked and realized it was a piece of gum. Yeah. Wasn't a magic stone. Our minds are so powerful. We are master creators and storytellers, aren't we? Alan says that depending on how we think about something, we can make it sacred, or we can make it everyday, or we can make it profane. He says that a mystic can find God anywhere. And then he quotes these beautiful words from William Blake. I know you know these. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Isn't that beautiful? A mystic can find God anywhere. Jesus told us that the kingdom of heaven is in our midst. We're in heaven right now, but we might not know it because we're busy thinking about hell, right? To live in the kingdom, we look for and find the beauty and the good all around us all the time. God is everywhere. All we have to do is look. God is right there in the person next to you. Right there in a rock. Maybe even in chewing gum, yes? A parable is a story that illustrates a lesson or principle. And fables often have characters that are plants or animals, but parables are about human beings. They're usually a short universal truth, some piece of wisdom for us. And they don't come right out and say it. We kind of got to discern it for ourselves. Jesus loved to speak with parables, especially when he had an important point he wanted to make. So here's one of Jesus's parables. And this is actually the last thing that Jesus told his disciples and the people who were gathered to hear him give the Sermon on the Mount. He told this story as a conclusion, as a powerful ending to this long day of lessons and teachings. I'm taking this from the New Interpreter Study Bible, Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 through 27. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because It had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. It's kind of a rhythm to that, isn't it? Like a poem. Well, the literal interpretation is so easy. The story is about two people, one who builds a house on rock and the other who builds a house on sand. And when the floods and bad weather come, the house on the sand collapses and the house on the rock can survive it. Deeper, we know that this means it's a good practice to build our house on the rock, but it also means to build our life on rock. I probably heard the story of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's an actual bell tower built in a town called Pisa in Italy. They started construction in 1173, and right away when they started building it, the thing started tilting because its foundation was really soft and sandy. After a little while, they stopped, and they didn't build anything for like 100 years so that ground could settle, and then finally, 200 years later, the building was finished. Not a good idea to build on sand. My husband has recently been talking to construction crews about building a turnaround in our driveway. And they talk about how deep to dig and what kind of grade of gravel to put in there and how to compact the fill to make it a strong foundation so that it can support the weight and withstand the climate here, right? So build your house on rock to get through the storms of life. Outwardly, these two houses might be identical. They might have the same floor plan and siding and roofing. The only difference is their foundation. The lesson is, yes, to build your house on solid ground and build your life on solid ground. On a deeper level, Jesus asked us, which person would you rather be like? The one who hears and does nothing, or the person who hears and transforms her thinking and her life? Jesus calls us to know our higher self so that we can speak and think and act from this higher consciousness within us. He wants us to live from that divine light that's within us. A few years ago, I went to the Renaissance Festival, and I saw this vendor who had big baskets of, well, kind of ugly rocks, actually. They were round and gray and scruffy looking, about some the size of golf balls, maybe up to tennis balls. But if you bought one, you could cut it open and see the inside was crystals, colorful crystals. I looked, they're called geodes. Geodes they're kind of cool the way they're formed. When lava flows and it leaves these gas bubbles in the rock, later sediment gets into the bubbles and hardens and it creates these geodes. When I looked online about information about geodes, I read this, that, where did that go? Oh yeah, here it is. Geodes are like a Tootsie Roll Pop. You know, the candy, hard on the outside with a surprise center on the inside. Right. So what's beneath us? What provides the foundation for our lives? In Unity, we have spiritual teachings and principles that guide us. And what's our surprise center? That beautiful divine light that's within each of us. Jesus is saying at the end of this long day of teaching, don't just hear my words, do something with them. He gave us instruction and he told us wise teachings through his parables, and he led by example. He taught us when to pray, to go in the room and shut the door, and not pray on the street corner and try to pray long, elaborate prayers that impress other people. We pray to make the connection with God. He taught us about giving and receiving, about love and forgiveness. He taught us to treat other people the way we want to be treated. He taught us not to blindly follow rules and dogma, but instead let that inner light be our guide. Let that be our compass. Live from our own knowing of what the truth is and what is good. Live from Christ consciousness. Here's another story from Alan's book. He talked about Thomas Edison, the great inventor. Apparently Edison knew this principle that what we need to know resides within us, at the core of our being. So when Edison was kind of stumped and needed some inspiration for an experiment or a project, he would lie down on his couch with a rock in his hand. And as he drifted into sleep, his subconscious mind would kick in the dream state and connect him to that universal mind, that field of infinite potential. And then when he was just, so relaxed and in this state, the rock would fall out of his hand and crash on the floor and wake him up so that he was able to write down what he was thinking about or dreaming about then and use that information. So now you know. Take naps. I wanted to see if I could find out more about this and really to verify if I'm telling you the truth or if this is just, an urban legend. And on the internet I found a lot of pictures of Edison taking naps. Sometimes under a tree, on the ground, one on the workbench in his office. Apparently he could fall asleep anywhere. And in my research I found that other inventors and artists do the same thing. A lot of people have found this technique to be useful. Connecting to our unconscious mind and connecting to the superconscious mind. In the book, How to Speak Unity, Reverend Temple Hayes writes about the value of spiritual principles. She says that principles are a set of guidelines. They are a map we use to drive through life. In Unity, we say we have tools rather than rules. And these tools enable us to live with purpose and with meaning. When we hear the word rule, we immediately want to break it, or we worry that we will break it. When we speak of tools or guidelines, we are empowering ourselves to live a deeper life, a life of meaning. When we think of tools, we use tools to repair and clean or create. So we create the life that we want to live with the tools that we have. Our fifth basic unity principle tells us that it's not enough to read and listen and learn about these principles. We need to live them. Through our thoughts, words, and deeds, we live the truth that we know. We're called to live from an awareness of oneness. When we express the divine power within us, we embody a positive and progressive and practical approach to life. And that's what we call unity. So this week, I want you to look for the sacred every day. I want you to go for a walk. How about pick up a rock, put it in your hand, and spend a few minutes with it contemplating. Maybe take a nap. I'd advise a hammock outside. That sounds good to me. Practice seeing the good in situations in your life. And look for the divine in other people. And every day, many times every day, I want you to look for that surprise center in yourself. That divine light within you. You are alive and in love with Spirit. And remember that daily. So we'll close with Namaste. And this is pretty much what it means. The divine light and love within me. I honor that light and love within me. And that light and love within me recognizes and honors the divine light in you. Namaste. Namaste.